Christy, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 2 of my 2023 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Otter Friends and Sea Friends. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with the two larger otters. I wanted this to be like a little couple, so I'm going to have a dad otter and a mom otter and then a little baby. So for the two adults, I am using 4 shades. I'm using E21, E23, E25, and E27. I want to use the 3 darkest shades for the majority of their bodies, and then I'm going to add that lightest shade on the center of their face and their bellies, basically. So I started with the E27 and laid in a bit of shadow for this little guy since he's leaning over toward the left-hand side. His shadows are running down his back on the left and blending out with that E25. And then I'm going to come in with that E23 and really start to fill in a lot of that space. I'm going to fill in his arms and his legs and just leave that space in the center like I mentioned on his face and his belly so that they can be a little bit lighter. I'm also going to color in most of his tail. I did save a little room for the E21 on top there, and then I'll come in with that lightest shade. Now the E21 is quite a bit lighter than the E23, so it does take a little bit of work to get that to blend. You can see that there's kind of like a harsh line where those colors meet up. It's not nice and smooth like the rest of the shades. So I am going to go back in with a little bit extra of that E23, and I went ahead and filled in his tail with that E23 as well, and then I went back in with another layer of that E21, and you can see that the blend is much smoother there. So I'm going to move on to the mama otter now, and I'm going to color her the same, except that I'm going to flip my shadows. Since she is kind of leaning toward the right hand side, her shadows are going to go on the right hand side down her back. So I'm just carefully coloring around that little baby. I don't want to accidentally get any color on him. Using that E27 once again for the darkest, and then I'm going to start blending that out with the E25. So if you didn't want to use 4 shades on these, you probably could skip the E27. I think it does add a nice bit of extra shadow in there, but you know, if you wanted to only use 3 markers or you just don't have as many shades of brown, you could leave off that darkest one and just start with the E25. So again, I'm going to leave the lower part of the face light and then a little bit of room on her belly, not too much because that baby is covering up most of her belly. But I will come in with that E21 and fill in the lower part of her face and then her belly, and I did add a little bit on her tail just like I did on the daddy. I went out of the lines a bit there, so I am going to grab my colorless blender and push that ink back over, just kind of coloring over the edge until it goes back over the line there, or pushes back down actually into the paper. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I did for him, is come back in with a second layer of that E23 and then another layer of that E21 as well, just so that everything is nicely blended. So for the baby otter, I am actually going to leave off the E27. I wanted him to be just a touch lighter than the mom and dad. So if you want to see what the otters would look like if you did leave off the E27, this is where you'll be able to see it with the baby. And it's not a huge difference. So like I said, if you wanted to leave that one off, it's not really that big of a deal. But I do think it just added a little bit of extra definition on the outside edges to the mom and dad. So I'm going to blend out a bit more with that E21 just to lighten him up a bit. And then I did come in with a little extra of those lightest two shades, just like I did on the other two. To give them some rosy cheeks, I'm going to go in with R22, and I'm not going to even blend it out with anything because they're so dark. I think that it's just going to kind of fade into the brown of their fur. And then I'm going to continue using that R22 to color in the clamshell. I know clamshells are not usually like maybe a dark pink or whatever. Maybe sometimes, I don't know. But I wanted this to be a Valentine card, so I needed a place to add in a little bit of either pink or red to kind of give me that little bit of a Valentine theme. So I decided to go with the shell because it was the easiest place to add it. So I did blend out that R22 with the R20 and R11. And then I'm also going to add a little pink belly to my fish, starting with that R20 and then blending out with the R11. I'm just doing the belly like I said, and then I'm going to take that R22 and just add in a little rosy cheek and blend that out with the R20. And then I'm going to switch to some grays for the rest of the fish. I'm going to use N0, N1, and N3. And I'm starting at the top with the darkest on the back and then on the bottom of the face just to make it look a little bit different there. So I'm going to blend the N3 out with the N1, but still save quite a bit of room for that lightest shade so that it'll kind of meet up with those pink shades and they'll kind of blend and transition between each other fairly easily. Just coloring a little bit over that pink so that everything is smooth. And then I'm going to use the same shades for that large rock, but I want to darken it up a bit. So I'm going to add in N5. I'm going to start with that and just add in some extra grooves following the lines there that the artist has drawn. And then also just adding in a few extras here and there. And then I'm going to blend that out with the N3. And, you know, rocks aren't really smooth and they have a lot of variation in them. So you can really kind of play with this and do whatever you think. You don't really have to consider like a light source or anything like that necessarily. But I am going to keep kind of the top lightest because that is where the light would be coming through from the top of the water. You know, this is going to be an underwater scene. So I blended out the N3 with the N1, and then I came in with a little bit of that N0 right in the center there. And then I'm going to move on to my little sea plant. And I decided to go with kind of like a muted green. So I went with G40, G43, and G46. And I'm going to add a little of that G46 to the top and bottom of each of those leaves. And then I'm going to add an extra section to the one that's kind of twisted. So where it's twisted, the light would not hit. It would be casting a shadow on itself. So I did add a little extra shading in that area there on both the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to blend out that G46 with the G43, just pulling toward the center of each of those leaves. And then I'll use the G40 to fill in the rest of that space. But it wasn't quite as saturated as I would have liked, so I am going to go in with a second layer on there, just adding a bit extra to kind of beef up that contrast and give me a little bit of extra depth there in the colors. So I went back with my G46 and then I'm blending that out with the G43 and I'll finish with the G40 again. And this is real quick and easy to do because everything is already mapped out for me. I just have to add that second layer in. Then I'll take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and go over the eyes of my mom and dad otter and then also my two fish. And then I'm going to trim these images out with their matching dies. For the background, I'm going to be blending some Distress Oxide inks onto a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. And I'm starting at the bottom with some antique linen. I'm going to create a little sandy bottom here. So I'm just bringing that up a little ways. I want just a little bit of that bottom to show, and then the rest is all going to be water. So just putting a nice layer on there, and then I want to deepen that up a bit. So I'm going to grab some gathered twigs, and I'm going to add a little bit to the very bottom, taking that up into the antique linen, and really defining those bottom two corners and that bottom edge especially. So once I'm happy with that, I'll go back to my antique linen and just smooth out that blend. And then I'm going to switch to some blue shades, and the first one that I'm going to use is Speckled Egg. Speckled Egg is a really interesting color. It is a light blue, but it's got a little bit of gray to it. It's very easy to transition into other shades. I just find it a very, very useful color. So I'm going to use that to kind of merge with my antique linen. And you can kind of see I'm leaving just the barest little stripe of white cardstock between these two, just so they kind of don't muddy into each other. And then I'm going to add in some Stormy Sky for my next shade. Again, this is like a more desaturated blue. It's definitely darker than the Speckled Egg, so it's going to make a nice transition, but it's going to blend really nicely with it because it's in that same kind of tone. I'll go back to my Speckled Egg blending tool and smooth out the transition between those two. And then I'm going to darken up the top using Chipped Sapphire. So I'm going to add that and bring that down into the Stormy Sky and kind of just darken up, almost like I'm breaking it up into kind of equal sections here for each shade. So I'm just going to work back and forth between these blending tools, making sure everything is nice and smooth. I'm not doing any splatter on this background, so I really did want it to be a nice, smooth background. So just, kind of switching back and forth between the tools until I'm really happy with how everything is looking. And I did go back in and add a bit more of that Speckled Egg down at the bottom. And then I'm going to take this little heart in the Otter Friends stamp set, and I'm actually going to turn it over because I wanted a solid heart. And I'm going to stamp that in some white ink. Now the one that I have is so old. I mean, it's got to be like 13 years old. So it's from Colorbox, which is a brand I'm not even sure if is around anymore, but I'll link to a different one down below. That is something similar. So I'm going to start stamping out some hearts, and I'm starting on the edges because I know I'm going to put a frame around the scene. So I am going to be able to cover that up if I don't like it. And the one didn't stamp quite right, so I just kind of blurred it with my fingers a bit. Now, this ink is going to dry back quite a bit. Some of these hearts that I'm stamping now are going to be nearly invisible in the final card. So don't be alarmed. I just wanted to kind of enforce that Valentine theme. I did turn my heart back around now, so I'm stamping out the outline. I wanted to have a mix between the two, so I'm kind of just switching back and forth between using the front and the back because I didn't have a large solid heart to stamp out. So I'm going to flip it back over and do a few more of the solid ones now and just add those here and there. So they're almost like bubbles in the background. Now that it had ink on the one side, it didn't really want to stay on the block, but I managed to get it on there. And so I'm doing some first generation stamping and some second generation stamping, so I get some different looks. Some is a bit lighter, some is a little bit darker, but like I said, this is going to fade quite a bit into the rest of those Distress Oxides, so you're not going to see it as well as you do now. So I'm going to stop there for now and, kind of see how light it ends up getting, and then I can kind of go from there later on. So I'm going to set this panel aside to dry, In the meantime, I'm going to grab a piece of Lawn Fawn guava cardstock and the Hello Bluebird Gallery Frame 4, and I'm going to cut out the frame. It does cut out a few sections there. I'm only going to use the outer part for today. So now you can see that that panel has dried a bit. Some of that white ink has faded. I'm going to pop it in my MISTI so I can stamp my sentiment now. And I am using VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it is that dark ink that lays nicely over those Distress Oxides, and it doesn't fade back like that white ink does. It's going to stay nice and bold on there. So there was a little section in the middle of the word Otterly that wasn't quite as dark as the other letters, so I'm just kind of re-stamping, which is the great thing about the MISTI, until everything is really nice and even. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Ballet Slippers cardstock, and I'm going to stamp on the inside using guava ink. And I chose another one of the otters, and the sentiment says, "I utterly adore you." So I'm just stamping that down in the center, and then I'm going to set that aside. I've added some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back of that frame, so I'm going to peel off those release papers and line that up over my background so that I can pop that up and have a bit of extra dimension, so it really kind of frames up the scene. And it needed a little bit of extra support there. My foam tape was a little bit short on that one side, so I just added a tiny piece there to fill in that gap, just so everything would be really well supported and it wouldn't buckle as it goes through the mail. So I'm just lining that up and popping that down, and you can see how much that white ink has faded now, quite a bit. Then I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of that scene, and I'm going to pop that up in the center of my card front. So I'll get a little bit of that lighter pink cardstock showing through on the outside edges, which really helps it kind of look like a Valentine card. So the matching dies actually cut out this little otter's paw so he's able to hold something. So I'm going to tuck that little clamshell into his paw there. And then I'll add some foam tape to the back of him as well. I'm adding foam tape to the back of almost all of the images just to give them a bit of extra dimension on this scene as well. So I'm just cutting down little pieces until I have each of these items really well supported. And then I'm going to start to arrange them into a little scene here. So like I said, I'm just trimming that down so that everything is nice and flat behind there, but gives it that little bit of a raised detail. Then I'm going to start with the big rock. I'm going to put that down in the bottom right corner, and then I'll add the plant behind that with some liquid glue so it'll look like it's kind of pushed back in the scene a bit. And then I'll take the otter that is holding the clamshell. I'm going to add him to the scene, but I'm not going to press him down yet, because I want to make sure that I have he and the other otter here, the mama otter and her baby, kind of arranged in the same way. So I'm just kind of getting them both situated in this scene before I press either of them down into place, giving them kind of the same angle there. And then you'll see that I did stamp out an extra clamshell and actually an extra fish as well from the Otter Friends stamp set. So the clamshell, I'm going to add a little piece of foam tape for the part that's overhanging the rock, and then I use liquid glue for the part that is on top of it. And then I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of the fish as well. So there are 3 fish in that stamp set. Originally I thought I was just going to use the 2 that are swimming straight, but then as I started to think about the layout of the scene, I thought it would be a good idea to have this extra fish in there. So I'm going to add him kind of looking at the mom and baby, and then I'll add one over kind of swimming out from the plant towards the dad otter, and then one kind of down at the bottom just to balance out the scene. And now you can see that those white hearts have almost completely disappeared. You can just see a few little outlines there. So I wanted to add a few extras. So I went ahead and grabbed the Balloon Buddies stamp set, which has like a medium and a small size heart. and I'm stamping out a few extras of those. I didn't want to add any more big ones because it would be hard to fit in around those images, but the smaller ones are a bit easier to kind of squeeze in here and there and make sure that they end up being visible. So I'm taking the small one first, and then I'm going to come in with the medium and add a few extra hearts here and there as well. I'm not going to flip these ones over and do the solid white. I just thought it would be probably too tricky to fit in here between the images, so I just decided to do the outline hearts. But you still see a few of those solid hearts in the background if you really look. So my last step is to come in with a little bit of Stardust Stickles and add some sparkle to the scene. I'm going to put it on each of the bellies on the fish so they can have little sparkly fish scales there. And then I'm also going to add it to the clamshells, just kind of tracing the outlines on the back there, just following those lines. And that's it. I'm not going to overdo it. So I will pick that card up to the camera so you can see all of the detail and all of the stickles as you tip it into the light. You can also see more of the hearts as you tip it into the light. And then there's another peek at the inside. So that is going to complete this one. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I know this is an older set, but I still love it. I just think otters are so sweet. So if you enjoyed it too, go ahead and hit that like button to let me know, and make sure that you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so that you're always alerted when I post a new video, which I do every Monday and Friday. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 2 of the previous 2 years of Valentine Card Series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.